from now.
What's going on? This is Chris Van Vliet, and you're watching Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova Podcast.
The Kasanova Podcast, the #1 podcast in Hawaii, is brought to you by these contributors on Patreon. If you'd like to see more content like this more often, as well as more podcast reviews, impressions, early access releases, live streams, and original content, then consider becoming a patron today. All right, and welcome everyone to another episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova Podcast. I'm your host, Mekel Kasanova, and I'm coming at you with another amazing interview. And in today's episode, I've got the honor and privilege of having the one, the only Miketendo, aka Dongle, aka Dude. You haven't played this game? Yes, people, I have the honor of having Dongle onto the show, and man, it's such an honor because I love this man's content. If you haven't watched his content, please stop this podcast right now. Go to the link in the description down below, click on his YouTube channel, and go watch his content. It is some of the absolute best content that is available on YouTube and across the web. He also runs a podcast called XVGM Radio, where they talk about so much from video games to video game music and more. So if you're ready to do it, I'm ready to do it. Let's go ahead and welcome Miketendo onto the show. And welcome everyone to another episode of Hawaii's #1 podcast, the Kasanova Podcast. I'm your host, Mekel Kasanova, and I've got the honor, the privilege. I'm just deeply honored and privileged to have the one, the only Miketendo of Dude. You haven't played this game?
That's
on
right.
This show.
Yes, thanks for having me. This that is way too much boasting on how awesome I am, because I'm not that awesome. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
Complete lies, people. This man is completely awesome. And fun fact, he's one of the reasons I got into YouTube, because your work has inspired me over the years. So man, Thank you for putting out quality over the last. Can't believe it's almost been 10 years you've been doing YouTube.
8 years. Yeah. It's been crazy. It's been a wild ride.
Yeah, do you mind like giving a background on yourself and like how you got into it and things that you're into, that you know, and also plug all your outlets, so your social media, your YouTube, everything. Yeah,
of course. Well, the channel is youtube.com/dongled. If you need a reference for how to spell that, just think of a dongle cable and add a D at the end. It is an inside joke with a friend of mine. It never meant to be like, I was hugely inspired by Happy Video Game Nerd, who's now going as Stop Skeletons from Fighting, Derek Alexander. And I loved his channel and I loved what he did. And when I went and found his channel, it was originally called Low Fat Jello. It was like LO, or it may have been IO, and then fat, PHAT, and then Jello. And I remember looking at that and being like, who is this guy and why does he have a show called Happy Video Game Nerd? Like, what is the correlation there? And later on he changed it. And the thing is, doing this show for 10 years and people kind of know, because I do the call out at conventions. I do the call out on the podcast, on, the videos on Twitter, anything, that it's youtube.com/dongled. So people have kind of become accustomed to it. And I remember a few years ago, I was like, oh, maybe I'll change the name. Maybe I'll change it to actually like, dude, you haven't played this game. But the channel has kind of evolved beyond just that show So it just made sense to keep it dongled. I don't know. But as far as history goes, so yeah, my name's Mike Levy. I have been interested in video games since I was probably about 6, when my grandfather ruined my life and gave me an NES. So
it all starts back with the NES.
Listen, I'm telling you, I was big into sports like back then. I mean, I still like sports, but I was a big baseball guy. I'm a big Mets fan, and so I was in Little League. Like, I was a thin kid, like up until like 4th grade, and then just like everything hit. Just like the S hit the fan, if you know what I mean. So, but yeah, no, I was just really, really interested in video games, and I always have been. And things just kind of, when it comes to my interest in video games, they went back and forth between like video games and music. Like, music was a really important part of my life when I was in high school and everything, and middle school, and video games kind of took a little bit of a back seat at that point in time. I was into wrestling a little bit too, like around that time. And I didn't really get back into video games. Like, I was playing throughout high school, but like it wasn't like my sole interest. Like, music was my number one interest. And then comics. I got back into comics at that time. I was into it when I was a kid. So I was always into like nerd culture and like geek culture type stuff, that it was just always like my bread and butter. But it wasn't until I would say I started working again I worked at a video game store, and that is when I started building my collection. Like, it was 2003. I was working for like Game Crazy, and I was just like gobbling up all these games that were coming in that were like $5, $10. I got like Final Fantasy 3 complete in box, mint condition for like $20. You know what I mean?
What?
Yeah, like back in the day, like nobody cared about the stuff. I mean, it was just, you could get so much stuff for so cheap. And so I just started cultivated a collection, a retro collection, despite the fact that I was still at that time collecting like GameCube and PS2, and I was still into it. But it wasn't until when I was in high school, it was the 90s, like late 90s. And I wanted to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I was into drawing, but I was not great at it. And so I was like, whatever. I don't think I'm going to do that with my life. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And it wasn't until my dad came back from a parent-teacher conference, and he met with this my English teacher at the time, Mr. Blair. And he was basically like, your son has a real talent for writing. And I really think that he should explore that. Because at that point I was like, oh, I'm going to go to school, and I'm going to go to college, and I'm going to get a computer science degree. And then I'm going to make video games. Little did I know that you need math and science to do that. And I was terrible in both. So it was one of those yeah. So it was like one of those things where I was like, well, okay, what am I going to do now with the rest of my life? And it was that moment when my dad came back and we sat down, and we had a conversation. And, my dad and I always butt heads, but like, that was like the one conversation where I actually like listened to him, and I was like, this makes sense. So I started writing game reviews for my high school paper. And then I decided I really enjoyed like seeing my name like in a byline. So I was like, I wanna write for a living. So I went to college for journalism, and I minored in English, which turned into something called a cognate, which is like a step down from a minor. And I had a rough go initially at college, like a lot of college students do. I was on the 6-year plan, basically just first 2 years I partied and hung out and played video games and drank and just, lived the college life. And do I regret it now? Yeah, a little bit, but like it all kind of worked out, and I was able to graduate college with a degree and everything. I had, again, I was working for the college paper, and I was doing media, like entertainment. So I was like interviewing bands that would come to town. I was I was writing game reviews, and the thing that really kind of solidified it for me was Video Games Live was coming to New Haven, because I live in Connecticut, so it was coming to New Haven, Connecticut, and they had for the very first time they had a special organ that was like 400 years old or 200 years old or something like that. Yeah,
wow,
yeah, it was like some crazy organ, and they got this guy Martin Lung, I think his name is an Asian keyboardist, and he played like the Super Mario theme blindfolded or whatever. So they brought him in, and he played Castlevania music, because Castlevania is my favorite series of all time. And so they played like Bloody Tears and like Vampire Killer and all these like amazing songs on an actual organ. So I filmed it like with my really terrible like 2 megapixel like hand camera, and I wrote this huge story, which was actually like a front page, my very first like front page article in the New Haven Advocate, and I got to interview Tommy Tallarico, and he asked me to come backstage, and I met him. I got a photo with him. He signed. He worked on Metroid Prime on the sound. He didn't do the soundtrack, but like he developed a lot of the sounds that were used in the game. And so I had him sign, because he never got official credit for it in the game. So he wrote like a little speech bubble over Samus, and he wrote, "Where's my credit?" And then like we joked about it, like it was cool. And he signed it, and I got a photo with him. And that was like kind of my moment where I was like, I want to do this. Like I want to do this for a living. I want to interview people and like get to know their story and you know, really put their info out there so that people can learn about this stuff. And so that was at the tail end of college. I graduated college, and I was just I couldn't find a job in the industry. And it was crazy, because I remember getting a card, because the editor of IGN was there, happened to be visiting family at the time. And so he was backstage, he was talking to Tommy Tallarico, and I kind of like started up a conversation with him. He was like, "Oh, you're a journalist?" I said, "Yeah." And so he gives me his card. And that's the moment when I was like, oh my God, this is it. Like, I'm going to write for IGN. And I remember I got my resume together shortly after I graduated, and I sent it to him. I sent some, you know, a bunch of like different articles, and never heard back. So, I mean, it is what it is, you know, that's life. So I'm not, you know, a lot of people look back on the past and they're like super bitter or upset about it. And I was like, I understood that it comes with the territory, because this dude probably gets like, you know, 4,000 letters, you know, a month or a week, or 4 million emails, especially like working in the corporate world now. Like that's all you get is just emails. So I ended up working for a communications company, and I'm still working for them, doing like inventory of like their warehouse parts and stuff like that. So that's like my real day job. So I work like a 40 to 45 hour week or whatever. And then on top of that, I'm doing YouTube and podcast and all that stuff. So it kind of never ends. But anyways, long story short, I ended up getting really into watching like Angry Video Game Nerd, 16-Bit Gems with Rue, Claim of the Grey Wolf, and Happy Video Game Nerd. And I thought these three personas just really remind me of myself. Like if you combine these three people, and maybe like really old Pat the NES Punk, like not what he does now, like his original reviews. His original reviews, because he loved bad humor and like goofy, and he kind of like reveled in it. Like it was always like an eye wink, like a, you know, you know, this is a terrible joke, you get it. So that's kind of what it became as far as what the show transformed into. I was also really into Hey Ash, What You Plan, which was a really cool show and very well written. And I thought to myself, like, that's a funny show. And so I kind of took all these ideas and I was like, what if I can make like one show that was like my personality, but like taking all these ideas and kind of combining them into one. So Dude, You Haven't Played This Game was the name of the show that I came up with. And I the only reason why the show existed is because I am a huge Castlevania 2 fan. It's my favorite Castlevania.
It's my first one.
Your first one? Yeah.
My first one was back in the day.
Yep, me too. Yeah, I remember like I went over some kid named Matt's house, and I was just like playing video games with him. I was like maybe 7, 8 years old or whatever, and he was just like, "Here, like play this game," and I'm like, "What is this?" It just blew me away. So, yeah, I just really like Simon's Quest. So, when I saw the Angry Video Game Nerd video on it, as well as Ego Raptor's sequelitis video on Castlevania 2, I was like, I need to make a response to this. I was like, I'm not happy with the way that these guys are painting this game. Like, it's getting an unfair rap, and I wanted to put my own spin and perspective on it. So I started working on a essay, documentary type thing on Castlevania 2. And it just kind of fizzled. I also, at the time, had like a lot of wrong information. Like, I remember I put like Kinyo Yamashita's as the composer. And Yamashita was not the composer of 2. That was Kenichi Matsubara. So it was one of those things where I went back and fact checked my script and was like, oh man, like I can't believe I did that. So it was kind of like a go back to the drawing board sort of moment for me, but keep some of the assets and keep the script and everything and some of the stuff that I had. And so what I ended up doing was I went to MagFest one year. This was like maybe like year 10 or 10, I think. It was like 2012. And I went
year
to
10, I think.
Yeah, I think it was year 10. And I went to Derek Alexander's panel where him and his friend Calvin were chatting about how Derek makes videos. And I was just so inspired to do something that when I got home, my wife, well, my now wife, she was my girlfriend at the time. She had bought me a camera, like a camcorder. This one right here, still use the same camera for a lot of stuff, and it's a good camera with the right lighting. And I started working on in my apartment. The very first episode of Dude, You Haven't Played This Game, I reviewed Metroid. So I didn't even do Castlevania 2. I put it in the back burner, and I was like, I'm going to do something with Metroid. And so I filmed and edited what ended up being like a 30-minute just mess. I look back on it and I'm just like, what was I thinking? Like, this is so bad. It was just, the jokes weren't good, and it was long, and it just was dragged out. And like some of the jokes were kind of like, especially nowadays, like not like appropriate. Like, I don't know, just like, and there was swearing, like unnecessary swearing. Like I was trying too hard to be Angry Video Game Nerd. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do now? Like, I gotta, like, do I want to keep going? And I said, yeah. So I started working on more episodes, and I tried to put out an episode like once a month. And so I think I did a follow-up Rescue Rangers, the very first Rescue Rangers. And then I did Final Fight Super NES and compared it with Sega CD, the Final Fight CD. And it just kind of took off from there. And those early episodes, that first year doing the show, for those who are like, I still don't get it. Like, what the hell is he talking about? It is basically like skits that like reference the material, jokey type stuff. Either I'll have like a guest come on the show who will be like, you need to play this game to review it. Or I'll do like a, I'll pick, like, things will just kind of come to me. And sometimes I'll just sit and stare at my game collection until I like find a game that I'm like, oh, that'd be perfect. That'd be fun to talk about. So in fact, I just did that like 2 nights ago. I was like, where do I go from here? I just released a new episode. I was like, what do I do? And just kind of stood there or sat down and I stared at my game collection. I was like, I don't know. I don't really know what to review. And then what I'll do is I'll grab a couple games off the shelf and I'll pop them in and I'll play them for a little bit and I'll see if I get inspired to talk about it. And I'll give you an example. And again, this is one of those ones where I was like, this isn't going to be PC. Like, it's not going to be appropriate, which, sometimes you may care about that. Sometimes you may not want to piss people off. Yeah. So it's like one of those things. But it was Speedy Gonzalez for the Super NES. And so I thought it'd be really funny if I played myself, but then I also played like a different version of me who's like is walking in and has like a sombrero on. Like at first he has a sombrero, and then I'm like, no, don't do it. And then then he like walks away and he comes back with like a mustache, and I'm like, don't do it. And then like he leaves and he comes back and he has a guitar, and I'm like, no, don't do it, don't you do it. And then he comes back again. He starts playing one note, like, and then just like I throw a book at him or something, and then the show starts. So that's, kind of how the review show is. It's just like really super dumb, slapsticky, goofy comedy. And a lot of it is just like dad puns. Like a lot of it's just really bad jokes that I'm like, it's funny, right? And it's not funny. And I'm in on the joke. I don't, I'm kind of a self-depreciating. Yeah. I don't, I try to kind of insert, because you got to have a little bit of, I don't know what you want to call it, like covert narcissism or I don't know, but just like I'm not like, I always try to put it out there to fans or viewers that I'm like, hey, this is like budget humor, it's not, but there's like people who dig it and people that stick around. Like you had mentioned that you're, a fan of the show. So like, obviously I'm tickling your funny bone. I'm making you laugh, or I'm coming up with something that you're like, oh, that was funny. So I don't know. That's kind of how that started. And I've been doing it for 8 years, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of hard work, and sometimes you get burnt out. And I find that like towards the end of the year, I just got to stop and be like, I just like Christmas break. Like I'll put out a Halloween review and be like, all right, I'm done for the year. I'll work on stuff, but like, I'm not going to put anything out really.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
like, and that's one of the things like I've noticed too, like with a lot of people, they don't understand that for us as content creators, that it is very easy to get burnt out. It's hard to stay in that creative process like all the time. And, I've transitioned from working, like I used to work for a hospital as an analyst, and I did that for about 7 years. And back in September is when I transitioned over to podcasting and YouTube full time. And the thing is, like, people are like, oh, it's super easy. You just play video games all day. You just hit record. I'm like, no, like you got to do scripting. Yeah. It's something like I've made several posts about this on my Facebook and on social media, like Twitter and whatnot. Yeah, and I've told people that, when you're a content creator, when you're making videos, like you do the stuff that you're doing, you're a videographer, you're a script writer, you're an audio engineer, you are, your lighting team, you're doing the post editing, like
it's all me. Yeah. I have help. I do have help. I have because I know how to play. So I played percussion and drums for several years. So like I could probably do a little bit of that, but like I can't write music at all. So my buddy, I've had several musicians over the years do like intros for me for the show. Currently it's this guy Retro Shred, who does awesome, like he did like a heavy metal 8-bit kind of thing for me, and it turned out awesome. So definitely check him out. He's so underrated. He's so underappreciated. He has Twitch. It's Retro Shred Music. So if you're on Twitch, follow him on there. And then my buddy Paul, high school buddy of mine, Paul Holloway, did my intro effects, like with the starry background and everything. And so He actually hasn't done them for a number of years, but like I still credit him because he gave me basically like a blank slot, and he was like, "Here, you could just use this and put whatever you want in it." But he did it for several years, and I didn't really pay him, or he didn't want anything. He was just like I offered to pay him. I always offer to pay or do something nice for somebody that helps me. Like I've had lots of like friends and actors and stuff like that in my show, and I'll either pay them or I'll like feed them. Like that's like my rule. like either I'm gonna feed you and give you like pizza or something, or like because I appreciate it. Like I always want to make sure people know that if you're doing something for me to help me out, like I appreciate it. And you know, a lot of people don't get it as far as how much work goes into it. I try not to like get into that on social media a lot of the times, because a lot of people still are very stuck in the mindset like, oh, I don't care. Like, you know, but like it is definitely hard work. To give an example, a lot of my Halloween reviews are big. But probably the review I spent the most time with was this game called Battle Chasers Night War, which was a really fun it's like it's like a Western RPG, like a Diablo like hack and slash type game, but it is at least as far as the visuals go, and the dungeon crawling aspects, but it ends up turning into like a Final Fantasy VII kind of battle system. Really cool game, but I ended up doing that, and I spent 90 hours playing the game. So that's 90 hours right there. And then writing the script writing process is actually really short. Usually, like, I'm not the sort of person who writes something and I'm just like, perfect. I will usually go through a draft, and then I'll go back, I'll read it out loud to myself, because that's one of the things they tell you to do when you write poetry or write creative writing or anything like that is read it out loud to yourself and make sure it sounds good to you or possibly to other people. So that's like, you know, a couple hours right there. And then the voice over work and editing process for the voice, taking out all the spacing in between, taking out the ums, the uhs, you know what I mean? Taking out all the flubs, all the, you know, mess ups. That's like probably a 2 to 3 hour process. And then the live action stuff, setting up the lighting, setting up the cameras, setting up the camera stands. If you have special effects, if you're doing green screen, you know, thinking, you know, just like in your head, how you're going to do this. Like, how am I going to get this shot? How am I going to get this person to enunciate this line, you know, giving line direction, all that sort of stuff. So that is like a couple hours. And then the editing process is like a good like 20 to 25, 30 hours. So it's a process. And same with the podcast too. A lot of people don't realize I also have a podcast. It's a video game music podcast called XVGM Radio. And that is like, if you like video game music, it's in the form of a radio show. So we play music. We have specific themes. I co-host it with my friend Justin. And, you know, you said, I remember you telling me before we started that you've been doing this about 3 years. Right. So I did another show with Ed Wilson, who now does the VG Embassy. And we did a show called Pixel Tunes Radio for same type of show. But just, you know, things fell apart, and, you know, it didn't work out. And we did that for 4.5 years. And so XVGM, when I was starting up a show, I'd start it from scratch on my own. And luckily I had Justin with me, who had like done a guest spot a few times on the show. And I really enjoyed being on the show with him. He and I were friends like for years. Like, I've been friends with him for over 10 years. And so it was like, oh, do you want to do this show? And he was like, yeah. So we started up a podcast, and he handles like all the web stuff and all the web-based stuff and the Patreon and all that. And, you know, and he, you know, he picks the tracks with me, and we, you know, we put on a show, and we made it more like radio oriented, where we had like fake callers call in. And again, that's part of that, like that stupid humor where like, we'll have like a character call in from a game, Like for example, we have a FM Towns Marty episode and FM Towns that we did, and that is coming out this upcoming Wednesday. And for that, we did one of the characters was Cammy, so we found a voice actress to play Cammy from Street Fighter. And so before the song plays, we get a call, and we have like a fake like producer in the background who's her name's Janine, who's named after the Ghostbusters character.
Yeah.
And it's actually Janine is actually a Metroid. So like an actual like Metroid. So we'll be like, yeah, Janine, can you forward that call over? Talking to no one. And so she forwards the call over, and it's Cammy. And Cammy's, like, oh, and Bison's chasing me. I need you to play my song so I don't lose the fight or whatever. And we're like, do you mean Vega? And then we're like, wait, do you mean Balrog? Like, who do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? And then she's just like, no, play the damn song, and we're just like, what? All right, well, this is that song, then we introduce the song. So, the podcast is heavily post-production, like heavily edited post-production. And that takes like a week of just editing the podcast. He works on his breaks. I work on my breaks. We put them all together. I put the show together, and then I add the little special sound effects and stuff like that. And that's been going strong it'll be 2 years in a couple months, like June. So that'll be 2 years. So that's a total of 6 years podcasting. So
man,
yeah, it's crazy.
And that's one of the things too, like when it comes to podcasting, I don't think a lot of people understand how much work, like that's another area people don't understand that as well. Like I've had people say, yeah, I'm gonna start a podcast. I'm like, okay, so what are your topics? What is your theme?
Yeah.
What is all that? And they're like, oh, I need to know all that. I'm like, kinda.
Yeah.
Kinda.
You need a mission statement. You need a plan. And you got to formulate everything down. I mean, like before Justin and I started it, I had kind of seen that the writing on the wall when Pixel Tunes Radio was ending, and so I kind of knew. So I started planning like maybe 2 months in advance. That I knew it wasn't going to work out. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to start this show on the back burner. And when it fizzles, and Ed wants to go do his own thing, I want to make sure I'm prepared so that I could start right away. Yeah. So Ed approached me and said he didn't want to do the show. He approached me a couple times and was like, I don't know if I want to do this. And I was like, all right. And then he just kind of was like, let's do one more episode. I think it was, I've talked to him about it, and he was like, well, I saw how bummed you were about ending. And I was initially pretty bummed about it, but like I feel like it was for the better because And again, that's what I was talking about before. Like I've learned doing the show, being on social media, doing all this stuff, looking back on the past is fine. You could kind of look at it, but like, you got to just move, the time doesn't stand still. It just keeps moving forward. So I just got really inspired to do my own thing. And Justin was along for the ride. And, what I like about doing the show with Justin is he never says no. Yeah. And if he doesn't agree with something, he'll tell me, and he's not afraid to tell me. But at the same time, like he's always like, well, what if we tried this, or what if we tried that? And we kind of fine tune each other's ideas. Yeah, Justin and I put the show together, and we're both pretty happy with the way that turns out. And we kind of fine tune each other's ideas so that if I want to try one thing, or he wants to, like, I'll give you a perfect example. We were talking about an anniversary episode that we're going to be doing for a specific game that is coming out in the near future. I'm not going to say what game, but you can probably guess a game. And so we had to push it back because the date got changed. And so we were like, well, what are we going to do now? So I gave him an idea, and he was like, well, what if we try this? And I was like, that's also a really good idea. And he was like, well, I like both the ideas. So we're like, well, let's just do both of those as shows. And they're like really unique ideas that I don't think anybody in the video game music podcast scene has done. So it's just like really exciting. Like every show that I'm doing with him is exciting and new. And even if we're revisiting like old ideas that I may have done on Pixel Tunes, it's new and different because it's with somebody else. And it's, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but doing 4.5 years of video game music podcasts, you start to learn a lot about video game music. So when Justin helped me film one of my Dude You Haven't Played This games, where I went out to Massachusetts and went to a wrestling event, and we filmed at a wrestling event for I think it's Elite Wrestling. I can't remember.
I remember that episode.
Yeah, for I reviewed WWF WrestleMania, the arcade game, on the PlayStation 1, and so we drove out there and we got invited out there, and I worked with one of the coordinators, this guy Trevin, really nice guy. And so we got to work with the wrestlers, like the actual wrestlers, and kind of act out these skits. And it was different because it was a totally different thing, because normally I provide a script and I'm like, I wrote this is the script, this is what we're doing. But with that, he was like, you can't do that with a wrestler. Like you can't you can't give a wrestler a script. Like you got to let them flow on their own. Give them an idea and they'll run with it. And we did, and it turned out great. But anyways, Justin came up to help me film that episode. So we're on the way back, driving back, and this is like right when we started right after we started the show. And I was like, dude, you got to hear this you got to hear this soundtrack. You got to hear that soundtrack. And I'm playing on all these video game music soundtracks. And by the end of it, I kind of was worried. I was like, oh man, I just totally, like, he drove down too. And like, I paid for gas and paid, bought him lunch or whatever. But I felt bad because I was like, I just took up this dude's entire car ride playing video game music, and I didn't even like ask. So I talked to him about it, and I was like, I'm really sorry that I did that. And he was like, dude, don't worry about it. Like, you turned me on to some really cool stuff. And I was like, awesome. Like, so that's the thing I like about not only our friendship, but our work relationship with the podcast. But the thing that I try to tell most people when it comes to podcasting is, if you're going to do podcasting, you have to do releasing on a regular schedule.
Yes.
Like it is not the sort of thing where you could put out an episode and then like 5 months later be like, all right, here's my second episode. Like, no, dude, you got to do it every single, either every single week, every other week, every month. Like, you've got to set a schedule and stick to it and be diligent about it. You can take weeks off. That's fine. But like, you have to have a schedule, a regimen, and you've got to build up your episodes. So that way people, because when people look at iTunes or whatever for their podcast needs, they're going to be like, am I going to listen to this podcast that has like one episode every, 6 months? Or am I going to listen to a podcast that has a new episode every other week that I can count on and rely on for consistent entertainment? I mean, you know how it is.
No, and it's something, because I've had there's several. There's not a whole lot of podcasts out here in Hawaii.
That's why you're number one, right?
Basically. It's kind of funny because it's the inside joke that I usually say on most of my episodes or my streams. I'm like, people are like, are you really the number one podcast in Hawaii? I'm like, yeah, but I also don't have a lot of competition either. Because most of the podcasts out here, they typically they either cater towards like politics or towards local issues, and I'm like, that's cool. I'm not trying to dabble into that because that can be murky water. So I'm like, I just want to entertain people, because one of the things, especially when I went into doing this show, was a lot of people, around my age in their 30s or younger, they're like, man, I want to, how do you do this in the game industry? How do you get into the acting industry? How do you do this? Because a lot of us, being out here in Hawaii, we don't have a direct one-to-one connection with any of that.
Right.
So, I was just like, okay, well, I'll just do this. And a lot of people started gravitating towards that. And other podcasters reached out to me. They're trying to start something. Like, there's this other one called Rising Tide, and she's like, yeah, I really want to have you on my show. I'm really impressed with your work. I'm like, oh, well, what do you like about it? She's like, oh, I don't know any of the people you interview. I don't know any of the stuff you're talking about, but you're doing really well. And I'm like, great.
So you want to interview me because I'm good at what I do, and you see that I have a lot of Twitter followers? Like what? Like
right?
That's just. I mean, like, like I went and I looked at your show, and like I listened to a little bit of the James Corlick episode. That's his name, right? James Corlick. Yeah. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like
Adam, I think.
Adam Corlick. Yeah. So then I started going through the list of all the stuff that you've done, and I'm like, this guy's talked to some industry like people, man, like big time. Like we've talked to composers on our show. We try to get composers on XVGM Radio. So we've had like Grant Kirkhope, who did Perfect Dark. We interviewed him specifically about Perfect Dark. He did like Banjo-Kazooie, like all GoldenEye, all the crazy stuff like that. We had Layla Wilson, who did Freedom Planet on the show.
That game is so good.
Yeah, that's a really good one. We talked to Coda, who if you follow like Vert, like Jake Kaufman, he did a lot of stuff with Jake Kaufman back in the day. He's played with him at like MagFest and stuff like that, and he's done games of his own, and his style and his sound is very similar to that. We've had Norin Rad, also known as Matt Creamer, on the show. He did like Retro City Rampage, Shakedown Hawaii, Slaying. Like he's done so many awesome soundtracks. He's so good. Venture Kid, such a good soundtrack. So yeah, we've had some pretty cool people on the show. We had Jeff Ball on the show, who did Time Spinners.
Wow.
Like we've had some really cool people on the show, and we just interviewed another composer, and that'll be out in about a month. So it's really exciting to interview those people, but at the same time, like we also just did an episode with like one of my like childhood friends, this guy Brian, who's like big into adventure games. So we did like a Sierra Games episode. So we were just goofballs on the show. Like we just joked around and made jokes, and but yeah, doing a podcast is a lot of hard work and effort, but it's similar to the review show. And kind of one of the reasons, again, I was talking about how I did, dude, you haven't played this game for, probably, I don't know, 4 years before I started doing or maybe like 3 years before I started doing the podcast. And I featured the podcast. I made like a video version of it and put it up on YouTube. And then on top of that, I also did one for XVGM when that started. So I wanted to continue the process. So we have it streaming on like all podcatchers and all that stuff on RSS feeds. But at the same time, you could also just check it out on YouTube at the channel. And what's nice about that is it gives me the ability to do a consistent release, because I'm bad with releases. Like you won't see something. When I was just doing Dude, You Haven't Played This Game, I would only release one video a month, or maybe like 2 videos a month. And it would be like a rant video, like what's the deal with Craigslist, or, like stuff like that. But I don't like doing those videos as much, because I tend to not like to, I like voicing my opinion, but at the same time, I don't want people to, I don't want to be one of those sort of websites where I just get people doing like clicking on a video just because they're angry, like if I put out a video and it's like, oh yeah, the Castlevania Requiem disappointed me or whatever, like here's a video about it and my thoughts on it. You get all these people that show up, especially if you do it quickly, like before the big guys like RGT85 and all those, types of people. There's this whole mentality on YouTube where it's like, first, I have to be first. I have to.
Oh, man.
And like, I just am like, yeah, I just want to talk about Castlevania for like a hot minute. Like, can we just, I was like, can we just talk about like Castlevania Requiem, this thing that came out like a while back? And so I'll just make a video and I'll put it out. And if I'm the first person or one of the first people to put it out, then you get hate clicks, which is like all these people that show up and they're like, you don't know what you're talking about, man.
Yeah.
Like I did one for Contra Rogue Corps. I think that's the last one that I did.
Yeah.
And I got so much hate for that because I was like, listen, the game's not out yet. I mean, like, let's give it a chance. Let's have it come out. And I made like a video that was like 7 reasons or whatever why I'm still excited for Contra Rogue Corps before it came out.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a lot of hate for that video. And I just decided, like, I don't really know if I want to make those types of videos anymore. I don't think that my voice, I'd rather take the effort. I'd rather not put out a video like that and instead put that effort that I made that video with and put it towards like a review. Yeah. Or put it towards one of my other shows that I do on the channel. I have a show, 2 other shows called Noob Repair and Gaming Linguistics, which I started. Gaming Linguistics and Noob Repair kind of started as like, I need a way to add content to the show or to the channel with not minimal effort, but like I want to put something out that has my stamp on it, that like is something that I care about. And since a lot of people are listening, they're probably like, he said Rogue Corps, not Rogue Core, because that, you know, that's a thing.
It is, yeah.
I know it's core. I just like saying corpse. So a lot of people will be like, oh, well, you know, you said it wrong. And I started thinking about it and I was like, well, what other stuff do I say wrong? Let me go through the list. So I started making lists of like, you know, games that I was like, how do you say that? And it got me inspired to do Gaming Linguistics. And that is basically a series where I look at media that has been put out by developers or publishers that I could find on the web, along with like articles or discussions that other people have had as far as like how to say it, or even like asking somebody who's native to the language too. A friend of mine from college who was my roommate graduated later on with a German degree. Like he speaks like pretty fluent German or whatever. And he lived in Germany for like a year or something like that. And so I asked him, like, how do you say Air Guys? You know, that game? Like, yeah, on PS1. So I gave him the spelling or whatever. And he was like, oh, it's like Air Guites or whatever. I can't remember off the top of my head, but, you know, that's just an example. So I had to use that reference along with stuff I found in the media, like trailers, you know, hype clips that for when the game came out, E3, like anything on E3, commercials for the game. So that's kind of my reference point. Cartoons, like if the series had a cartoon, I just did one on Mike Hagar or whatever, and that one was really tricky as well. So it's like, that's Gaming Linguistics, is just like trying to figure out how to say this. And then Noob Repair is like, I know how to solder. I'm not good at it really, but I know how to do it. How do I do something? How do I provide a repair or a DIY style show without actually doing soldering? Because that's what a lot of repair work and mod work is. There's a channel called Retro Game Arts or Retro Gaming Arts, and that's run by my buddy Paul, and he does a phenomenal job, like, you know, putting together all these crazy mods with this detailed wiring, and explains the mod chip and all that stuff. And I'm like, yo, I just want to like switch out my my VMU battery or my Saturn battery. Like, how do I do that so it doesn't die all the time? Oh, I just need like a little battery, like that you would use in like a earpiece or whatever. Oh, okay, that's easy. You know, so I'm working on one right now that's basically, it's like there's certain games that require 3D glasses. So I'm working on a workaround for specific types of visual styles that, like Jim Power, the game Jim Power for the Super NES came with a pair of 3D glasses. Finding those 3D glasses is it's impossible. You got to basically buy the game complete in box, and even then you may not get them. So instead of spending like $80 on the game complete box or $70 or whatever it is, I'm like, yo, just go on eBay and like buy these glasses. Like that's all you need. So, or even like how to clean games, how to repair, how to like, I remember one time I did like a blind test where I took like a cartridge and I took like 5 cartridges that rattled. And I was like, all right, these 5 cartridges rattle. How can I fix them? Or can I fix them? And I opened every single one up and I was like, all right, I fixed, 3 out of 5. Like it was like a small little piece of plastic that broke off on the inside. I took it out. I unscrewed it. I screwed everything back in. Works like a charm. Shake it. No damage. So, I've got a lot of ideas for that show for things to do. But again, it's like, time is short.
Yeah.
And, everybody kind of knows that. But I'd rather do a video like that than do like, start, talking smack about other YouTubers. I feel like I see all these other channels out there that are like, I'm gonna insult all these other YouTubers. I'm gonna call them out because they use Patreon, or I'm gonna do this, or I'm gonna do that. And I'm just like, how low have we scraped the bottom of the barrel to do something like that? Like, I don't know. I mean, I've been doing this for such a long time that like I remember when it was just, hey, video, like I'm going to put out a video because I want to cover this game and I want to talk about it and I want people to get into it. And like I want people to check out this game because I like it or because I think it has redeeming qualities of some sort. That's how YouTube used to be. It used to be like, I'm just going to put this out because, I want my friends to watch it on YouTube. And I want to see their comments saying like, oh yeah, I own this game or I play it. It's like, it used to be more about dialogue between creators. And I feel like a lot of that has died for a number of reasons. One, it's just not the same YouTube it was. Now it's more like, today I'm going to tell you about, what game is coming out in 7 months, or like, I'm going to talk about the Switch all day. Like it's just, and I'm not knocking the people that do it. I'm just saying it's not for me.
Yeah.
It's not something that I feel comfortable doing. I don't want to just
but you've noticed this obsession with it's like Switch or nothing. Like this mentality. And I wonder, I'm like these people that are so gung-ho about the Switch, where were you when the Wii U and the Wii and the GameCube, like,
yeah, people forget that the N64 was so hated on.
Yeah.
So like I remember sitting in study in high school and I remember getting in fights, not like fights, but like verbal arguments and discussions with one of my good friends now, my buddy Scott, who's like he was a huge Sega guy. And we would go back and forth. He'd be like, oh, the Dreamcast is going to wipe the floor with the N64. And I'd be like, no, the N64 is way better. Wait till the, Dolphin comes out or whatever the GameCube was called before. I think it was Dolphin.
Dolphin, yeah.
Yeah. And then like Project Revolution for the Wii and all that stuff. Like, I've always been a pretty big Nintendo fan. And it wasn't until I started working at that game store that I was like, well, let me check out the Genesis. Let me check out, I remember getting a PlayStation in the 90s, like late 90s. That was my first like foray aside from PC outside of, Nintendo. So it's like, it's one of those things where like I started getting into more stuff. It started opening my mind and exploring my options as far as what consoles I wanted to check out. And the Dreamcast was my first Sega system. So
same here.
Yeah. God. So I don't know.
Yeah, 20 years.
Yeah, it's crazy. Dude. We just did a video episode on XVGM, but it's just I don't know. I want to put out content that is going to make somebody leave a comment that's like one of the best comments I ever got was, "You made my day better," and I was just like, that is just awesome. Like I never set out to do that. It was just like, I just want to make a goofy video that my friends will watch and comment on. And sometimes you get people that like, even the podcast, like I remember reading a really thoughtful comment where somebody was like talking about Pixel Tunes Radio, and they were like, that podcast got me through my day. I had a terrible day. My car broke down or whatever. I had to walk like 2 miles, and I listened to Pixel Tunes like the whole time while I was, and that like got me through my day. And I'm like, even talking about it right now, it's like giving me goosebumps on my arm. Like you don't think about that stuff as a content creator.
Yeah.
Like you don't think about the little things that like you may put some content out that made somebody like, step away from the ledge. I'm not saying I did that. I'm just saying like there are people out there who make content and it makes somebody else's day brighter.
Yeah.
And so, I always try to support the little guys, like these people that are coming out that have like, if you have like 50 subs, 100 subs, 300 subs, one of my favorite content creators has like 300 subs, and a few others that I know have like under 1,000, still to this day. And like, I do my best to try to support them as much as I can. And then I have friends that have, 30,000 subs, 40,000 subs, 100,000 subs. Like I try to kind of maintain like a friendly level with everybody. But like, I'm also the sort of person where like, if somebody says something that's really stupid and not cool or is insulting to a specific group of people or whatever, I'll just be like, I'm done with this person. Like, I don't want anything to do with that type of, I'm too old for that stuff. Like YouTube should not be high school.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be high school drama. It should be, and like, it's fun. It's sometimes fun to talk about with my friends, like behind the scenes, where we'll be like, guess what this, POS did the other day? Like, what did they post? You know what I mean? But like, at the same time, I'm just kind of like, I just don't really want to be involved in it. That's why I tend to not get involved unless it's like friends of mine that I'm like sticking up for, and I it's just like how low as I said before, how low are people willing to go where they're just willing to scrape the bottom of the barrel for content, where they're just like, are we like TMZ YouTube now? Like
sometimes it feels like it.
I don't know. That's not the YouTube I want to be a part of personally. And there were a lot of times where I was thinking about quitting because I was looking at stuff like that. And I was like, I just don't want to be a part of this, and like views are down all around. Like every single person I talk to, big or small, is like, yeah, no, like views are not up, especially during certain months or whatever. Like, and I kind of, I run I go to all the different cons or whatever, like, a few different cons out here on the East Coast. And one of my favorites is here in my backyard, Retro World Expo. And I've gotten really friendly with those guys, and they have me hosting the Connecticut YouTubers panel, where like we'll gather up a bunch of YouTubers and we'll kind of all sit down and we'll have this big powwow with the crowd of people who are like newer YouTubers or people that have been doing it for a while, who just want to hear a different perspective. And like the number one thing I tell anybody who's willing to do to YouTube is, do not do it thinking that you're going to be AVGN. Because I'm not going to lie, that's the mistake that I made. I got into it and I was like, I'm going to sell merch and I'm going to go to cons and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to be a superstar. And then the views are not there. And and you get a lot of nasty comments, and you have to have thick skin. You're putting yourself out there, and you got to let it roll off your back. And I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. And last question. Here's the thing, because all the questions I had, dude, we've just like naturally just like
answered them.
Gone. Yeah. So I'm like, I'm over here like check.
It's because I do podcasting, so I know like the things. Yeah.
So the last question I have is there any advice you want to leave? I mean, within the last comment. You made basically you left advice. But for anyone who wants to get into like YouTube or wants to get into podcasting or writing, is there anything that you want to leave with them? Like any advice or
do it for yourself before anybody. Make content that you want to watch, that you want to hear, and that makes you happy. Because that's, I think, the biggest component that's missing from YouTube is the you. Yeah. Now it's just like, oh, I gotta put something out that everyone's gonna love. I gotta put out a video about this topic. I mean, like, I'm not saying you should completely ignore that aspect, because, like, again, we do anniversary episodes on the podcast where it's like, oh, the Dreamcast is celebrating its 20th anniversary. Let's do a video, or let's do a show on it. Halloween is coming around. Like, I'm going to do a Halloween episode or two or whatever. So I think it's important to recognize calendar and eventful moments when it comes to like creating content. Like, that's just smart business.
Yeah.
But YouTube should not be about giving Google as much money as possible. YouTube should be about you. I get that Google owns YouTube or whatever. And I get that you're not supposed to talk about Google AdSense or whatever, but I've been doing this for 8 years. And last month I made my first $100 amount that I could pull from my Google AdSense account. It took me,
it's crazy hard.
It took me 8 years to do that. And I gotta be fair. I put ads on my videos initially, and then I took them down. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wanted nothing to do with money. I wanted nothing to do with Patreon or any of that stuff. I was embarrassed by it. And I was like, I just want to put out the content for me. And I feel like that was my biggest growth as on the channel, is like when I stopped doing it for other people and I started focusing on the content and putting work into the content, I would just like release an episode. I'd put it out on a couple social media stuff, and I'd be done with it. And then I'd be like, all right, time for the next review. Like, what do I want to do? And it can get kind of rough when you do that, like assembly line style, but at the same time, like I did it for me, and I still continue to try to tell myself, like, don't do this because you have a quota to meet. Don't do this because you want to make other people happy. So I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. Like, do a review that you're passionate about, and write because you're passionate. Do a podcast on something you're passionate about, because that passion shines through. And if you're engaging enough, like, I don't think any Joe Schmo could do it, but I do think that, like, if you have the talent and the ability and do it, I think that you'll be able to be successful if you just keep plugging away at it. But don't do YouTube for money. Don't do it for fame. Just do it for you, and let and like, maybe you'll meet some cool people along the way. And that certainly happened with me. I met a lot of really cool people who I consider friends now, who do tons of awesome content. And it's good to know that those people that do that content inspire me. So like, I'll be sub to them, and then they'll put out a video, and I'm like, dude, that was a killer episode. Like, now I want to work on stuff. And so that's really helpful when you have like a group of people to kind of bounce off of naturally. And when it comes to the money, like, I'll tell a quick story before, because I know I talk way too much. So, so I started a Patreon like a couple years ago, and I kept it private, and I didn't release it. And then I think somebody found it, and it was like a fan of mine, and I thought I disabled it, like, at one point. Like, I set it all up, and I got it going, and I wrote up this huge thing explaining, mission statement and all that stuff. And I put it out there, and I didn't advertise it at all. I think I maybe put it in my channel, like up at the top right or whatever. Never asked anybody for money. I was really embarrassed to do that. Like, and I talked to other content creators about it, and they were like, well, you're not getting any money from Google, so why not? Like, why not ask for, a buck? Like, just do it as a tip jar. And so I felt really uncomfortable about doing that. And so I didn't do it. Like, I think I left it open accidentally. And I turned off all the emails and all that stuff. Like, I wasn't getting any info from it. And like 2 years later, I went, somebody reached out to me. Like, I remember what it was. I was in Discord having a conversation with some friends of mine on YouTube, some YouTube buddies. And we were talking about Patreon. And I was like, yeah, I don't have any donators. And they were one of my friends was like, yeah, you do. I was like, no, I don't. And they're like, yeah, you do, dude. You've got somebody donating to you. Like, I see it says like $2 or whatever it was, $10, $5, whatever. And I was like, no, that can't be. And I signed on, and sure enough, this guy had been donating quietly to me for 2 years, and I didn't even know it.
Wow.
And so, yeah, and I was blown away. I didn't know what to do. So I reached out to him on Twitter. I knew him, and I was like, dude, I just want to apologize. Like, I'm so sorry. I did not know you were giving me money on Patreon. Like, that's awesome, man. I was like, thank you so much. And I always try to thank people. Like, you get all these people who are just like, I'm not going to name names or anything. The people who are like, guys, stop sending me packages. Please stop sending me packages. Wow, another Switch game. Guys, you gotta stop doing that. That's just egotistical. I don't know. That's just so. Say what you will. I don't know. I'm probably gonna get a bunch of wood haters on my case, but whatever. I don't even care. It's just I only advertise the Patreon on my at the end of every review, because I have a specific tier, like, hey, if you're donating $4 or more, like you get a special thank you at the end of the episode. And I do regular updates where I talk to patrons, and I'm just like, hey, this is what's going on with the channel. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm working on. So I update people pretty regularly. I wish I did more with it, honestly. Maintaining a Patreon and like setting up goals and being like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then when you actually realize how much work that takes, it's like, oof, I think I could do that.
Yeah.
But most people are really understanding, and most people are just like, dude, I just like the show. I just want to give you a couple bucks. So, I try not to really push it that much. We do it quite a bit more on the podcast, because we have a live show that goes with it. Like, once a month we do a live episode, and like only Patreon people get access to that. They get all the thumbnails, the title cards, like early, like a couple days before the episode launches. And we just did a big giveaway where we gave down like several copies of Shakedown Hawaii digitally, and the soundtrack. We gave away I think 10 prizes or 11 prizes or something like that, to patrons only. So my own Patreon, I have a tier where it's like 15, like somebody pays like $15 a month. And I'll go game hunting for them, and I'll like find a game, like not like a crappy sports game. Like, I'm not going to buy like Madden 09 or whatever and send it to them. But I'll buy like a game, and I'm like, oh, this looks cool. Like, it's about like $7 to $10, and I'll ship it to them. I don't make any money on it. Like, I literally lose money sometimes depending on the game, but it's worth it, because you get people that want to help you and donate to you. And honestly, it's saved the show, because some of the props that I was doing, like, I use a lot of props. I use a lot of like special effects, and I pay people for their work. So like, I'm interested in like, this year I'm working on potentially getting an animator to like do animation for the channel for a specific review. And I'm also looking at hiring an actress. Like, I've had a friend of mine do some acting stuff for me, because she's really good. But like, I'm thinking about getting like somebody, like an actress, to like dress a character, and like, outside of just having a friend do it, like an actual, like somebody who gets paid for this every single day, like a, you know, nothing against that person, but like a professional,
yeah,
you know, person who's like an actual actress, like a SAG person or whatever. So, you know, I'm always looking at expanding and trying new things with the show. And I think that's really important. Like, don't be, another piece of advice is don't like just sit there and be like, all right, I'm just going to do this one thing. I'm just going to keep repeating it. Like always always reach out to somebody and say, hey, I want to do this. Like I have this thing that I'd like to do and I want to do it. I did a Resident Evil review with Game versus Game where we compared. We did a video on his channel. It was for Halloween. It's like my most popular review. And we did a video on his channel where it was like Resident Evil Saturn versus Resident Evil PS1. And all the different versions on PS1, like the Dual Shock version and Director's Cut, blah, blah, blah. Then he guested on my channel and I reviewed the GameCube game, the remake, Resident Evil Remake. So we had Justin, actually, my co-host, and his wife played. They played Barry and Rebecca from Resident Evil, and then so we did that. But then on top of that, I reached out to Julia Voth, who was the model who she basically they took her face and I think maybe her body too for Resident Evil Remake and all the subsequent later Resident Evil games for Jill Valentine. So she's like a lot of fans consider her officially like Jill Valentine, like for the face. She's done like photo shoots and stuff dressed up as Jill Valentine or whatever. It's really, really cool. So I reached out to her and there was a lot of back and forth, but finally I got approval to use a specific clip that she created. And I was like, do I have permission to use this? And she was like, yeah, go for it. So we got Julia dressed up as Jill Valentine eating a sandwich. Like the Jill, you know, the Jill sandwich bit. And so Barry and Becca are trying to reach Jill on the walkie-talkie. And they're like, Jill, are you there? Like, we got a lot of problems here. You know, we got zombies coming through the door. Like, where are you? And it cuts to Jill eating his sandwich. And it just keeps going back and forth, like, you know, throughout some of the review. And there was no audio. There was like, she gave me a clip that had like music in the background and no sound effects. So I had to make a tuna sandwich and go to the microphone and eat a sandwich and record it. And I used that as her voiceover for eating a sandwich. So that's like one example like of reaching out to somebody. And the second example and last example, I promise, is I'm a big X-Men fan and Wolverine is my favorite character, like, you know, of the X-Men of all time. And I reached out. I was a huge fan of the X-Men cartoon, the 90s one. So I was going to review X-Men Mutant Apocalypse on the Super NES. And I thought, what better way to do that than to feature, again, trying to think of something different, trying to come up with a new idea. So I decided, I'm going to feature, I'm going to try to reach out to Cal Dodd, who did the original voice acting for Wolverine. So I reached out to him and he was so nice. I would like beyond nice. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. He was like, absolutely. And I was like, I could pay you. Like, I don't make much on Patreon, but like, I'll pay you whatever. I'll pay you whatever I make for the next year. Like, just, I would love for you to do this. And he was like, I'll do it for free. Like, don't even worry about it. And my daughter had just been born. And he was like, I'm going to do it, you know, not just for you, but for your daughter. And I was like, this guy is so nice. Like, he saw like me posting a picture of like my daughter on Twitter. She had just been born, and he saw that and was like, I'm gonna do it for her too. Like, you know, I think, you know, that'd be really nice. So I was like, that is just, I want to give this man a hug. So my friend Brian and I met him he was actually going to Kineticon. So we met him at his hotel and he was super nice. And we found a quiet little area like in the hotel. And I broke out my laptop and we recorded his lines. And it's him as Wolverine saying a couple lines. Some of the lines are from the show, but most of them are brand new. One of them is involving pancakes and syrup. And I wrote it for him. I watch a lot of the show and I remember a lot of the show, but I wrote it with him in mind. And so I wrote, the line was like pancakes, or it was somebody's eating syrup without pancake, or somebody's eating pancakes without syrup. And, because of course Wolverine's Canadian, maple syrup and everything. And the whole bit was, I was talking about how Wolverine busts in the game. Wolverine busts out of this like glass area, this glass room, and lands like on this floor, and then you start playing as Wolverine. And so my comment was like, that is the most badass Wolverine, like that's the most badass intro to any game character ever in history. And then I was like, but it could have been better. And that's when I go back and forth between all these lines, with Cal Dodd voicing Wolverine. So that would have never, ever happened if I just was like, oh, I'm just going to do whatever.
Yeah.
So my point is, if you're going to do something, don't do the same thing over and over and over. Try to make something new, try to make something fresh, and try to not make the same video twice when it comes to a review. Try to always reach, I don't know, this is going to sound corny, but reach for the stars.
Oh man, did you have fun?
Absolutely. I had a blast. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We'd love to have you back on the show. And with that being said, people, if you want to catch this episode of the podcast, it'll be available on all podcasting outlets, from YouTube to all the major ones, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, everything you see at the bottom. If you're watching it, that is, if everything you see at the bottom, you'll be able to catch the podcast there. I'm going to leave links to Mike's YouTube channel, his podcast, Patreon too. I don't care what you say. I'm leaving Patreon too.
All right.
But all your social media links too. So if people are interested, and I highly recommend you guys do sub to his YouTube channel, sub to his podcast. Really, really great show, and just tune in and just support. That's the biggest thing. Just if you enjoy,
don't sub for sub.
do not
don't sub for sub. If you like, go to somebody's stuff and watch their stuff or listen to their podcast or whatever. And if you like what you hear, or if you like what you see, that's when you hit subscribe. It shouldn't be the other way around. It shouldn't be, well, I'll sub first and then I'll go check out their stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with that being said, people, Mike and I are signing out. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Hey, did you enjoy this episode of the Kasanova podcast? Well, I'm sure you did. And since you did, and you're wondering where else you can find it, you can find it on every podcasting outlet. Yes, that includes Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Launchpad DM by Podcast One, and so much more. And the only thing I ask of you is, if you truly enjoyed it, even if you didn't enjoy it, please leave a rating and tell us what you thought of it, what you like, what you didn't like, and everything in between. And also, if you're looking for video formats of this podcast and many more, you'll be able to find them on youtube.com/Mekel Kasanova, as well as on twitch.tv/Mekel Kasanova, and new episodes every single Monday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, that being said, this is Mekel Kasanova, Hawaii's favorite YouTuber. I am signing out. You guys have a great one.